Welcome to our lesson on the truth or veritas as an Augustinian value. In our knowledge of Augustine's biography, we have come to know in the Confessions that as a young student in Carthage, St. Augustine read a book by Cicero, a famous orator at the time and writer, of course, who wrote the book Hortensius. Hortensius is a philosophical book that moved Augustine to look for wisdom, to search for wisdom and truth throughout his life. In fact, in his confession, he would recall fondly that instance of having read the book of Cicero entitled Hortensius. At that moment, when Augustine encountered the writings of Cicero, he did not know that wisdom and truth is actually one and the same, and that is Jesus Christ. I remember Saint Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, a Carmelite nun who was martyred by the Nazi, and of course also a famous existential philosopher whom I think is the student of Husserl, Edmund Husserl, had this famous quotation that says, anyone who searches for the truth are actually looking for Jesus Christ. So we have come to an understanding that truth here is not just merely a set of principles or set of writings or concepts, but it is actually an encounter with the person, because Jesus himself claimed that he is the truth and the life. He is the way, the truth, and the life. So for us Christians, the truth is Jesus. Here, Augustine in his Confessions spoke about the Manichaeans as deceivers. They were trying to tell Augustine that they possess the truth, but they cannot show him the truth. In fact, in the wisdom that God has given to Augustine, he was able to detect that they are actually lying. They may entice you with sophistry and, shall we say, elaborate discourses, but in the end, it is just merely superficiality and there is no substance. In other words, it's just all image but no substance at all. And sometimes there might be some substance, but the substance is not according to the fundamental, shall we say, principles or fundamental ideas that has created our society, particularly the Western society as we know it. So that is the first experience of Augustine with regards for his search for truth. The second experience of Augustine about the search for truth was with Ambrose. Ambrose, as you know, is one of the four great Latin fathers, together with Jerome, Augustine himself, and Gregory the Great. Now, the first thing that motivated Augustine to listen to Ambrose is not because he thought that Ambrose possessed or knew the truth, but he was more, shall we say, what do you call this one? He was more of a curiosity. The curiosity of an intellectual. He went to the Cathedral of Milan, where Ambrose is the bishop, not to listen to the sermons of Ambrose for the sake of knowledge or the truth, but it is more to size up whether Ambrose is worthy of the fame that he got as an intellectual in Milan, one of the most, shall we say, wise or the wisest person in Milan at that time. So it's more of, trying to discover whether the fame of Ambrose is warranted or not. And that is the first motivation of Augustine. But later on, as he listened, gradually, he came to realize that indeed the beliefs of the Catholics, as expounded by Ambrose, are more defensible, more rational than all other philosophies that he was able to encounter with, and that made him became a convert later on to the Catholic faith. There's this idea nowadays that the truth is relative. In other words, what is true to you may be true to you, but it is not necessarily true to all. But that is problematic. Why? Because we have made the truth as subjective. In the Catholic Church and up until now, we are still teaching that what is true to all. It is not that something is true to one and then is true to the other, but false to the third party. No, it cannot be. For example, it is as basic as mathematics, for example. 1 plus 1 is not 3, but 2. So, there are things that does not depend on your feelings or what you think is right. Regardless of your feelings, regardless of your, shall we say, concepts, regardless of your own ideologies, what is true is true. So, when I say that if you are going to jump from a second-story building, you will fall, even if you feel like you are Superman incarnate, you will certainly fall. So now that is the issue nowadays, because there are so many of our societal realities that's happening now is dependent on what I feel. If I feel that I want to fly, it does not necessarily mean that I can fly, because it is against your nature. You are not a bird. So self-conception or self-identity must have a certain basis. It cannot just be something like, oh, I feel like that I'm a dog, and so I will act like a dog. And to tell you frankly, there are people, especially in the United States and in some other Western countries, that they think that they are dogs or they are donkeys or horses, and they would want to act that way. And the problem is this. The problem is they would want others to share in that, shall we say, illusion, by forcing other people to believe that they are such. So if they want to claim that they are dogs or they are donkeys or they are cats or they are vampires, for example, they want us to believe that they are such. They would force us in the name of toleration. So, for example, if I am this person, a human being, I would say, I feel like I am born a dog. And like, you can look at in the YouTube, for example, and they're role-playing, not merely role-playing, but they are really thinking that is their identity. So, what will happen now? Because I believe that I am a cat or a dog or a horse, you should also believe in what I say. But that is very problematic. Why is it problematic? Because you are imposing the falsehood that you want or that you convince yourself of to others. And that is not something that is tolerable. For example, if the children, for example, in your class would say, 2 plus 2 is equals to 5. Would you tolerate that? Of course not, because it is not true. So, even if you claim that you're a dog or a cat or a horse or a bear or a vampire or a fairy or a wizard or whatever you have, labels that you want to put into yourselves, well, the best thing that we can do is, okay, that's your opinion, but do not force me to accept it. Because I know that you are not a fairy. You cannot even fly. You are not a horse. You cannot even run like how fast does the horse run? Like 10 kilometers per hour, for example, or whatever speed they have. And then you will tell me that I believe that you are a horse, or you're a fairy, or you are a vampire? No, you cannot. I was able to see in the Facebook, for example, that there are people who are really changing their features. There was this one, was it a lady or a guy, I forgot, that he made, because he thought that he was a leopard. So what he did is, he placed tattoos on his face and his body that like spots of a leopard. How do you pronounce that? Leopard. So anyway, and then his teeth, he tried to change it so that he has fangs. Now, what, maybe someday he will put a tail on himself. I do not know. He will implant a tail. But the reality is, even if you're going to change your entire external appearance, it does not change that you are still a human person. You are not a leopard or a tiger or a panther or whatever you have there in your mind. It is not. So that is my point here. Truth is not something that you can just say, this is my truth, so you have to respect me. Okay, that is your truth, but do not force us. So that, I think that is something that nowadays has become very contentious. If you believe in a particular identity or whatever you have there, it's okay for me, personally. If you believe that you're a dog or a cat or a goat or a horse or a vampire or a leopard or a tiger or a lion, well, go ahead, if that is your belief. But there's a great difference there. Do not force us to believe that you are such. It would be like, pardon, I don't want to be stereotyping here, nor to be insensitive, but do not impose your delusion on us. Because we know that you are not a tiger, a leopard, a dog, a horse, or fairy, or a wizard, or a vampire. You are a human person. So, if you're going to impose your belief on us, and to the point that you have to force us to believe, and that is not. Because it will be forcing us to believe in a lie. So, the truth is not relative for us Catholics. We always believe that, because we have our basis of what is true. So what is the basis of what is true? Well, number one is, in the domestic point of view, what we have is the natural order, for example, the natural law. Because the natural law for us shows to us that it was, shall we say, it is a manifestation of the design of the designer, and whom we call as God. So, the natural law reflects what is true. Now, this is a very sensitive issue now, with regards to, for example, transgenderism, wherein a man can claim that he is a woman, and so he can undergo operations, for example, changing sex. We call that now as sex reassignment. Okay, so, well, I respect the rights of the person to, do whatever he wants, but it does not change the fact that he is still a male person or a female person, whatever the case is. So, why? Because the The chromosomes tells us that it is a man and a woman. You cannot change your chromosomes. Unless you change your chromosomes, then that is well and good for me. You see the point? Now, precisely because of the natural law, nature showed to us that that is the physical makeup, the DNA of a man, X and Y, and a woman, XX. So you may argue that, Father, there are also like these cases when there are trisomies. No? Like for example, trisomies like XXY or XXX, no? And so on and so forth. But again, that is not the norm. That is the exemption. So we cannot make the exemptions as the norm. I remember when I was studying genetics way back in college, when everything is this simple and political correctness is not yet the in thing, we even call that as aberrations. That those are chromosomal aberrations. Nowadays, you cannot say that anymore because it will be politically incorrect and insensitive to say that that is chromosomal aberrations. So, we knew in genetics during those time, like 20 years ago, maybe it's obsolete, you might claim, but anyway, I'm just conveying a fact. It was very clear that in our genetic class, that this XXY, XXX are actually not the norm. They are there precisely because something wrong happened in the division of the chromosomes, particularly during the process of meiosis. I think it's meiosis because the other one is mitosis. Mitosis is for the somatic cells, while the meiosis is for the sex cells. So X and Y chromosomes are actually chromosomes that are in the sex cells, the gametes. So when it divides, sometimes it does not divide properly, and so instead of just one set of male, one set of chromosomes from your father and one set of chromosomes from your mother, sometimes it mixes. So instead of having two, like XY or XX, you will have XXX or XXY, or whatever the case is. So for us Catholics, we cannot say, or rather we cannot accept that, well, there are XXY and there is XXX. Okay, but as I said, that is the exemption to the rule. Those are exemptionary cases. So, okay, maybe for those who have these triploids, you can say that, okay, you are XXY and XXX. But how about for those who have only two sets, X and Y or XX? How can you say now that those who have XX will have an XY? Which means that those who are female are males. Or those who have XY, which are males, can be XX who are females. No, you cannot. Because the natural law sets the limit to what we can say or not say. Another one is, for example, gravity. Okay, so as I already mentioned that before. You may feel that you are a superhero because we are now having our idols as the superheroes in the Marvel Cosmo or the Marvel Universe, for example, or the DC Universe. So we have Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Iron Man, Captain America, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, a person may think that, okay, I am Captain America. Well, if you believe it, go ahead. But do not force us to believe that you are Captain America. You may want to say that Okay, you are Superman or Superwoman. Okay, go ahead. Think whatever you want to think of yourself. But do not force us to think that you are Superman or Wonder Woman because you are not. Okay. If you think that you are Superman, then fly. Of course, you cannot fly. Then you will make us believe that you are such. That is not true. That is something that is false. So, I don't want, I'm not talking about here, and I'm not saying that we are to be disrespectful of the identity of others and how they conceive themselves to be. No, I'm not saying that. But there are things that you cannot change. Just as you cannot change 1 plus 1 equals to 2. You cannot change it. And so therefore, there are things in this world that cannot change just because you want to change it. That is the first basis of what is true. The second basis of what is true are what we call as the revealed laws. Now, if you are not a believer, then the second part will not be sensible to you. No? If you are not a believer, this will not be sensible, because this is already entering into the realm of faith. So, the Bible, for example, the Ten Commandments. So, the Ten Commandments will only make sense if you are a believer. If you are not a believer, then you can just neglect it or put it aside and say, oh, we don't believe in that. So, but for us who have faith in God, unless we become all atheists, but for those of us who are believers, it's very clear. The Bible, the Word of God as a revealed truth, is to be followed by those who believe. Of course, like for example, murder would always be wrong, because killing, thou shalt not murder, is part of the Ten Commandments. What else? Adultery will always be wrong for us, because it is part of the Ten Commandments, and so on and so forth. But the Bible cannot stand on its own, alone, for us Catholics. Now, unlike the Protestant idea of sola scriptura, wherein they believe that the Bible in itself can interpret itself. So, there is a difference between the Catholic interpretation of the sacred scriptures and the Protestant way of interpreting the sacred scriptures. What is it? For Catholics, we believe that the scripture cannot interpret itself. It needs an interpreter. For the Protestants, they believe that scriptures can interpret itself. In other words, all you need to know about how to understand the Bible is already in the Bible. But for us Catholics, is a different thing. The Bible cannot interpret itself. Rather, it is the church that will interpret the Bible. Precisely because the Bible was determined in terms of its canon, in terms of its list, by the church. The question is, diin nagaling ang Bible? Of course, from God, ultimately. But who made the choice that these are the books that are considered Word of God, and the rest of the other writings of that particular time is not inspired? Well, it was the church. It was the church who set the list, the canon. Originally, the canon for the Catholics is the accepted canon, because the one who set the list were actually saints like Athanasius, Augustine, and many others. They have their own canons. But later on, by the councils, it has come to a point that we have chosen what it is now. But the Protestants have a different list because they follow the list of Yamnia. That is the Jewish list. So, still the same, there are certain people, a group of people, who will determine which one are inspired and which one are not inspired. In other words, which one are scriptures and which ones are not scriptures. So, for us Catholics, we put that authority to determine to the church. So for us, the Bible does not interpret itself, but it is interpreted by the church. So, and that is where I am going to discuss now. The Bible as a basis for truth, as interpreted by the church teachings, which we call technically as the magisterium. So, what we have now are the basis for what is true. This is not a very, shall we say, profound discussion. It was just a superficial skimming of the subject of what is true. First, by the natural law. So you determine what is true by natural law, which means that the nature sets certain parameters of what it is and how it is. No? So, for example, the sun will always shine in the morning and sets in the evening. It will rise in the morning and sets in the evening. You cannot do otherwise. Plants are plants, they are not animals. And animals are animals and they are not plants. So, you cannot change that. So, in the same way, the human person is a human person. You cannot just say I am a cat or a dog because I want to be cat or dog. No, you cannot, because the science behind it shows otherwise. Unless you are able to prove that you are indeed, for example, that you are indeed a cat and not a person, so, or not a human being. So, well, the DNA or the genetics can, give us that support, or it can also tell us that it's otherwise. So unless these things are proven to be false, then we can say that the natural law, or the natural laws, if you want, nature, the laws that governs it, is a way of knowing what is true and what is not true. Second, the truth is based on the Word of God, and that is the written scriptures. And for us Catholic, as interpreted by the magisterium, or the church authorities, the church teaching authorities, particularly the Pope and then the bishops, of course, taking into considerations the teachings of the previous generations. Because we cannot, in the Catholic Church, we cannot just teach something which is against that which was taught. And that's another very important principle. The present magisterium cannot just claim something which proves to be contrary to the previous magisterium. In other words, the present Pope now, for example, and the present college of bishop cannot just come up with something and then it contradicts the teachings of the church fathers, for example, or of the previous magisterium. So the truth builds on truth. It cannot just something come out somewhere. No? So basically, that is how it is in the determination of what is true. And lastly, the truth in Augustine's works, together with the truth in the Confessions. Now, Augustine wrote some, maybe many of his writings are dealing with truth, because, as I said, the truth is Christ. But in one of his writings, Contra Academicos, in Book 3, St. Augustine gives us a beautiful image of what is truth through Alypius. Here, it says that, with what profound understanding and sensitiveness to what is best in philosophy did you direct our attention to Proteus? Proteus, of whom you know, is introduced as a symbol of truth. You will see, young men, from this that poets are not entirely despised by philosophy. Proteus, as I say, plays in poetry the role of truth, which no one can hold it, deceived by false representations. His lackings are let loose the bonds of understanding. It is the representation which, because of our association with corporeal things, do their best to fool and deceive us through the senses, which we use for the necessities of this life, even when we already have the truth and hold it, so to speak, with our hands. In other words, we should not be deceived by the external appearances. Because produce can just change externally, but the truth remains the same. Semper idem. And in the same book, he answered the skeptics, those who believe in the philosophy which we call as skepticism. Here, skepticism believes that our mind cannot perceive anything. And so therefore, because it cannot perceive anything, it cannot also perceive that which is true. The solution to this was that in the world is only one, or it is not only one. If there are many more worlds, then their number is unlimited. Of course, that is the skeptical way of looking at it. But the truth that we have, and I think what Augustine also taught, is they are revealed. Because they are revealed, our response to that is not an examination, but is an assent. In other words, you have to believe first in order to know. To believe is to know. So, in order to understand the eternal truth, which is God, our approach is not to dissect it in a way that dilutes it, but rather we have to approach it with faith. So, the first step to know God, to know the revealed truths, is to have faith. You have to believe first. It's different from the empirical way of doing things, which is to see is to believe. No, it's a reverse for us. We believe first so that we will be able to see the truth that is revealed to us. I have to understand here in Isaiah. I don't know. Yeah, this is I think one of the discourses. Someone has said, "I have to understand to be able to believe." I answered, "You have to believe in order to understand." And the prophet Isaiah also gave us an answer. If you do not believe, you will not understand. So, we have the capacity to know what is true, but first we have to believe you have to have faith. And that is very important nowadays because most often our idea is you have to prove first and then we believe. No, that is not the way by which we approach the revealed truths. We have to believe first, crede, aut, intelligas. We have to believe to be able to understand. Okay, so thank